I'm back from 1865, checking out the parallels between what's happening right now in America to what was happening in my day, America, 1865. But in particular, in 1860, as you guys know, I was elected, but in 1861, war was starting to break out. Now here you guys are, war breaking out for you guys as well. The consequences of war are so dramatic, and the stress and the terror of those that are contemplating it is so high that we start thinking, wow, I'll do anything to avoid this. So William H. Seward, he was my Secretary of State. So he's really the most powerful man next to the president. Or maybe more accurately, he's the number one man in my cabinet, or in anyone's cabinet, to a certain extent. So Seward, who had been a pretty solid advocate for freeing the black man, ending slavery, he began to throw away his convictions. And maybe he was sort of right. He knew that the consequences were going to be so dire that nearly anything looked preferable to a war between the North and the South. It could be argued that either one of those halves of America were formidable enough entities that they could have waged a reasonable war against nearly any other country in the world. Now those two countries were set to fight each other. And of course, I was always saying to my fellow countrymen, there is only one nation. We do not have two nations. The South was saying, we have declared ourselves a sovereign country. And I always said, there is only one sovereign country. That's the United States of America. The winner of the war would get to decide whether or not the South had become a sovereign nation or not. So the winner of the contest would, to some degree, be allowed to say whether the South had ever become a separate sovereign nation or not. Prior to the Emancipation Proclamation, the South was winning about 2 out of 3 battles. The Southern men were a little bit more accustomed to shooting and riding and hunting. They were ahead of us in the game of war. And most of the really significant generals were from the South. But after the Emancipation Proclamation was declared, January 1st, 1863, then there was a mighty switch. Little by little, the tables began to turn, and the North was winning 2 out of 3 battles. The South, 1 out of 3 battles. So now America, I would say, is in a similar position. If virtue and godliness is on the side of America, she will prevail in the wars that she's undertaking at the moment. Still, one of the things that I wish that the United States in 2026 would adhere to is something that Seward and I worked on when we were trying to decide, what do we do about this war? And Seward was saying, let's rejoin the South. Of course, that meant letting them keep slavery as it had been. I would argue that heaven sent Grant to help America to pursue a godly course. He's not really well known in that regard. We think of him as being an alcoholic, a drunk. But that wasn't really the case. That was his enemies kind of conspiring against him. Or more accurately, it was the enemies of freedom conspiring against the most formidable threat against the South. But he refused to let his soldiers gloat when Southern prisoners were taken or when Southern forts were forced to surrender. He said there would be no mocking, and our enemies would be treated with kindness. He was willing to implement the ideas and the concepts of generosity and forgiveness that I really felt was going to be the only way that America could be welded back together. In order to bring that welding back together, it was required that the South would really be quite thoroughly defeated militarily. Now, that was accomplished, but the next step was to make sure that we didn't end up with roving bands of terrorists all over the United States. That could have easily become the order, the world, kind of a breakdown of society that would have really kept America from ever becoming the power that she is today. As I look around, I can see that America has become something wondrous. So it might sound kind of backwards, but I hope that you, America, today, that you also will treat your enemies with kindness. And as odd as it might seem, mocking and hating our opponents is unhelpful. Did I say that right? If it's true that America needed God in order to prevail in my day, it's probably true that you're going to need God to prevail in your day. It's easy to start thinking we're invincible. We can do this. We don't need God's help. But I would argue that there is always a way for an empire, no matter how mighty, to fall. God bless America. God bless you, my fellow Americans.